course, they bloody well can. That was the tweet from the official account of Ukraine yesterday, which accompanied a video of President Zelensky walking through the streets of Kyiv, accompanied by Boris Johnson. It's emerged that Boris Johnson reached Kyiv on a Ukrainian train from Poland after the meeting was kept secret from the British press. And Johnson did not turn up to the war-torn country empty-handed. He has promised 120 armoured vehicles and new anti-ship missiles, which could be critical for Zelensky, who will be fiercely defending the east of the country, where Putin has now decided to focus his attacks. But was this little more than a publicity stunt from the Prime Minister? Joining us to discuss this now is Dr. Chris Parry. Dr. Chris Parry is a former Royal Navy Rear Admiral, a former NATO commander, and a former Director General of the Ministry of Defence. Thank you very much for joining us, Chris.
Hello, Nick.
Well, let me ask you about that question first. Was this little more than a publicity stunt?
Well, I'm probably not the one to ask. I think President Zelensky is the one to ask. He clearly appreciated it. It's given him a lot of support. It's given him a lot of political credibility, and he seemed to like it. And I think that justifies it alone, to tell you the truth.
Yes, he was fulsome in his praise. Do you think that there was an element of actually tweaking the conscience of not just Boris Johnson but the West in general by perhaps overpraising them for what relatively little they've done so far in order to chivvy them up to do some more?
Yeah, that's not normally been his style. He's quite forthright when he wants to criticise people. He's had a real go at Germany recently and France. So I think if he wanted to do that, he would have said so up front. He didn't actually go as far as to say, look, here's Boris Johnson. He's done great things for us, so has the United Kingdom, but you other guys haven't. He was quite careful to say, look, really glad Boris is here. The UK is our foremost supporter after the United States. Now, that's saying something. And to tell you the truth, we are. We were politically and militarily first out of the traps in saying that, this Russian invasion is both illegal and indeed must be stopped.
Well, saying something and actually doing and acting in accordance to what you're saying is not necessarily the same thing. I mean, some people might think that we've been dragging our feet on sanctioning oligarchs, specifically because that's where the Conservative Party was getting much of its money. But let's not go down that route.
Let's not. No.
Let's talk about your field of expertise, which is defence. Talk us through what's been offered then. Is it actually going to amount to much?
Yeah, I think we've got to bear in mind we've given quite a lot. The NLAW and Javelin missiles that have gone to Ukraine have played a major part in stopping Russian armour. There's no question about that. And the Starstreak missiles that go, let's not forget, 3 times the speed of sound are bringing down unmanned vehicles and aircraft even as we speak. So they're quite significant. Now, these armoured vehicles are the ones on which the Ukrainians themselves need the least training. Now, I think everybody forgets you can't just put a Challenger tank out in Ukraine and expect people to be able to operate them overnight. That's not the case. Many of these modern armoured vehicles are very sophisticated, and the ones that they can use, the Mastiffs and the Jackals, the ones that are going, are ones you can virtually step into and use straight away and be protected. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the real danger in the south is a Russian advance on Odessa. Whatever the Russians are saying about just concentrating on the southeast, they really want to dominate the whole of the coastline across to Odessa. So it cuts Ukraine off from the Black Sea. And if you look at Putin's speeches over the last 3 weeks or so, he wants to occupy the bottom third of Ukraine. It used to be known as New Russia in the 18th century, and that's what his real agenda is. He's saying he's concentrating on the Donbass region in the east. He really wants to create a land bridge across to Crimea and then extend across to Odessa. And what those anti-ship missiles are designed to do is keep that amphibious force of 8 ships away and make sure they don't land in the flank of the Ukrainians off Odessa.
Now, somebody pulled up something that Putin had written a good long while ago this last week, which said something of the order of his actual plan, or what he would like the most, is to create a new empire stretching from where he sits to Lisbon and back.
Yeah, well, this has been a familiar dream of Russian tyrants for centuries, hasn't it? I'm afraid he's the latest in a long line of Russians who think that Europe is on the end of their continent. This is the latest cycle, Nick, and it shows why we need to keep our armour bright. We need to be able to deter and resist coercion, whether it's at the nuclear or conventional level. And I've been saying to some friends today, to tell you the truth, aren't we glad we've got a nuclear deterrent, one that actually costs per head less than home insurance? We're not going to be attacked tomorrow with our nuclear weapons, that's for sure.
I think the mutually assured destruction, MAD, ironically, only works when either part isn't mad. But if one of the people who holds the nuclear weapons is mad, then they're mad enough to use one, then they're also mad enough not to be concerned about the consequences.
Yeah, well, it's not the case. I mean, the other thing is, Nick, there are a lot of people in this command chain. I think there's a sort of familiar trope that somehow Putin's got a magic button where he fires nuclear weapons. It doesn't happen like that. There's a lot of generals and admirals, I think, between him and the nuclear weapons who are thinking, you know what, we've got children and grandchildren, we might not be too keen on this. The fact of life is, nuclear theory is what I call theology. It operates way above the conventional military thinking. And basically, responsible states know how to play this game, and a lot of it is posturing. You neither confirm nor deny what you want to do with your nuclear weapons, and that's what keeps us safe, to tell you the truth.
Okay, talking about a more sort of rudimentary weaponry, you talked about keeping our weapons shiny. I think that was the phrase you used.
Armour, keep our armour bright.
Yeah. Armour bright, okay. I'm not familiar with military speak, but do we actually have much armour to offer? I mean, armoured vehicles, 120 armoured vehicles, they're basically reinforced lorries, right? It's like troop carriers, is that right?
They're better than that. What you're talking about is the old Saxon, which is basically a truck with some plates on the side. No, these are pretty good. These have been battle-hardened in Afghanistan. They've resisted being blown off the road by IEDs, improvised explosive devices. They're actually pretty good. They're going to resist what the big threat is in Ukraine, and that is Russian 155 millimeter artillery and the shrapnel that comes from that. And you're going to be able to sit in them fairly secure. That's the main thing. And the important thing, as I said, is you can sit in these and operate them straight away. You don't have to have extensive training, and that's the important issue. I'm sure there's more to come later on, Nick, but right now, this is what they need to staunch their defences in the southeast, and that's what we're giving them.
But is it true that you can't actually fight with these things, that they're just transport?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, if it can take you to the battlefield and you arrive unscathed, that's the most important thing. Most people will tell you in any major war, most losses actually occur on the way to the battlefield, whether you're in an aircraft or in a vehicle. So if you can provide what is known as protected mobility, it gets you to the battlefield with your anti-tank weapons, with your anti-aircraft missiles. They're not tanks. Of course they're not. They're armoured fighting vehicles, which have infantry and special forces in the back. But it gets you to the battlefield. What you don't want to be is taken out from 90 kilometres away by either tubed or rocket artillery. And that's what these things are designed to protect you against.
Now, we're talking about tanks, as you mentioned them. I was reading Con Coughlin, the defence editor of the Daily Telegraph, and he was saying that the reason really that we haven't been able to supply tanks to the Ukrainians is that we don't really have any. His number was 40 operational. That seems alarming.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we're transitioning now to a 21st century armed forces. I frequently say to people, look, tanks are so 20th century, and the war that we're seeing in Ukraine right now is a 20th century war. And we've seen time and time again now, it doesn't need a tank to kill a tank. You've got all sorts of aerial munitions, unmanned loitering munitions now will take out tanks. And you've seen what the Ukrainians have done to them. One of the things that people forget is in 2006, Hezbollah had a weapon called the Kornet. It's a Russian-made system, and it took out probably the best tank in the world, which is the Israeli Merkava tank. And so the tide is turning against tanks now and the way in which we fight wars. And we've got to be very careful about this. We have got a low number of Challenger tanks now. One other reason we can't actually lend them or give them to the Ukrainians is right at the heart of the Challenger is some very secret armour called Chobham armour. And we really don't want to give that away, to tell you the truth. because that actually goes into some of our armoured fighting vehicles as well. So there's lots of reasons. It's not just because we haven't got them. We're cutting some of the earlier variants up at the moment. They're just not suitable for sending to the Ukrainians for them to train on time. The other thing is all the ammunition that the Ukrainians are using is basically Soviet and Russian caliber ammunition. It's not the sort that goes into Challenger. So there's all sorts of logistics issues as well, much more complex. Con's a good friend of mine, but, there are complexities here.
OK, let's talk about NATO and what might happen next with its with new members, because Sweden and Finland are considering it, aren't they? What do you think might happen if they actually joined?
Well, I think it's going to upset the Russians. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the Finns have been dancing a very delicate line for 70 years now, being neutral and buying weapons from both sides. But the fact of life is nobody can feel safe in Russia's neighbourhood now unless you're part of a larger alliance. If I were Finnish and I were Swedish right now, I think I'd rather like the insurance policy of the democratic world holding the line against Russia. Because what's interesting here is, I was saying again to somebody last week, what if Russia had attacked Finland or Sweden? Do we think we'd have intervened? I reckon we would have done, because Sweden and Finland mean quite a lot to us on our northern flank, whereas perhaps in the early days Ukraine mattered more to Putin than it did to us. But I'm almost certain that even though they were members of NATO, if Sweden or Finland had been attacked, then we would have been involved.
Even though it would still be the same position that we are rooted to the ground, petrified with fear that Vladimir Putin's going to nuke us all.
Yeah, the trouble is, if you live in fear all the time of what your opponent's going to do, you lose the initiative. I'm afraid to say that if the alternative is worse, then you have to risk that. He was never going to use them. He was playing poker all the way up the scale there. And frankly, any leader of a country in the modern world who flourishes nuclear weapons around as war-fighting weapons doesn't really deserve to be running that country. It demonstrates you're running a rogue nation run by, frankly, a criminal elite.
Well, I mean, that seems indisputable. But, I mean, I've been sort of running through the possibilities in my mind that Putin might, set off a nuclear warhead at sea near Finland or Sweden or Ukraine. And then what would we do?
Well, it's very interesting because I don't know if you remember, but when North Korea got out of its box and President Trump faced them down, that's exactly what Kim Jong-un said. He said, no, perhaps I'll throw one into the sea and see what happens. And Trump said, fine, that's okay. But just remember, we're 1,000 times more powerful than you on the nuclear side. Do it if you want. And of course, he backed down.
I think he said that my button is bigger than your button.
I don't know. But the fact of life is Kim Jong-un got the message. And the trouble is, once you get the nuclear genie out of the box, you can't actually determine what will come back the other way. Somebody said quite rightly, if you try and use a small nuclear weapon in a regional conflict like Ukraine, you can't be sure you're not going to get a whole boatload of Trident back the other way. So people are very careful about unlocking that particular box.
Just finally, NATO has said that they're going to reinforce their presence in the Baltic states. It was a sort of a cursory presence at the moment along the border with Russia. What do you make of that? That's just going to annoy Putin more, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we need to annoy him a bit more, to tell you the truth. So one of the things I recommended at the start of this conflict is that we should actually pressure him where he is weak rather than where he is strong. And I think we're starting to do that now. We should put our nuclear submarines up into the Barents Sea to pressurise his northern fleet. We should be stepping on his toes around the Baltics and things like that. We tend to think the Russians are 10 feet tall. We've seen that they aren't. And I think we need to keep up the pressure on Putin on every front right now. This is a seriously dangerous regime and they need to be faced down.
I know I said just finally, but just one more question, if I can.
Right.
Can you actually see Putin failing in completely surrounding Ukraine as it used to be before he took chunks of it and making it essentially a landlocked extension of Russia?
What I think he will do, Nick, is I think he's determined, as I said, to try and get this province of New Russia reabsorbed back into the Russian Empire, as he keeps calling it. I think he'll fail to get Odessa, so that will be kept open. What he will do, I'm sure, is absorb the Donbass region in the east into Russia. He'll try and keep a land bridge open to Crimea, and he'll also keep Crimea. My own view is I don't think the Ukrainians have got a chance of getting Crimea back again. And if that's the case, they ought to say, well, if you want to keep Crimea, you get out of the rest of our country. It's as simple as that.
Chris, thanks so much for your time. That's Dr. Chris Parry, a former Royal Navy Rear Admiral, a former NATO commander, and a former Director General of the Ministry of Defence. So, over to you. Rachel from Ladbroke Grove texts, is there no end to the political pageant? Slippery Sunak flouncing out of number 11 in a bit of a strop and demanding an investigation. We're going to talk about that later. Boris turning up in his clown suit. No, it was illuminating that Boris Johnson looked even rougher than a man who had been under Russian bombardment for 2 months. Rachel says, Boris turning up in his clown suit in war-torn Kyiv, clutching a chicken and a file of pretend documents. Cressida Dick in tears as she walks out to ranks of police officers doing a weird Masonic bobber-job salute. If it's all about the optics, it's looking very, very bad, says Rachel. Well, it appeared as though Boris Johnson's trip was all about optics. I mean, what was it actually for? What could he say face-to-face that he couldn't say on the phone? They apparently chat a lot. But Boris Johnson was hailed by Vladimir Zelensky, so perhaps that was the reason he went. He secretly took a train to Kyiv for talks and pledged more weapons to help Ukraine resist the Russian invasion. The president said that the leadership shown by the UK would go down in history after meeting the PM face-to-face and staging a walkabout in the capital, which when I read that, it sounded sarcastic. Presumably the Ukrainian president doesn't know how close Boris Johnson's Conservative Party has made itself to the very people that are shelling his country. I mean, the Tories have prostituted themselves to whoever pays them the most, regardless of how unpleasant they are. You might think that a Conservative central office is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Kremlin, not GB, KGB. Unless I'm getting any of this wrong, in which case you must correct me. 0345 6060 973. Karen tweets, appreciate the visit, but how about helping the citizens of the UK? We are experiencing the biggest rise in the cost of living. How about some solutions to that? And capping energy costs. He can actually tackle these problems should he choose to, says Karen. He can. He has chosen not to. Difficult to get a photo op, I suppose. Mayfair. Hello, Jason.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. Listen, it doesn't really matter what it is for Johnson. It matters that he went, and it matters for the optics. Every Prime Minister, every President should go to Ukraine. Everyone should open their embassies again, even if it's a skeleton staff, and they should put their flags up. This is not a time to not show support. And yes, politicians are going to get photo ops, of course they are, like they do holding babies at elections. But this is much more important than what it does for Johnson. It's what it does for the Ukrainians. It makes them feel that the world is united behind them.
Yeah, I think they may be aware of that if they are still able to get the news. And I think the electricity is on, it's certainly in Kyiv, and the internet is still on. So they know that the world is with them. But what they want less, perhaps, than obvious shows of support is some actual real weaponry. And the things the things they keep asking for, we're not giving them.
Nick, I think they are getting stuff. Czech Republic has sent tanks.
Yes, they have. The only country.
Slovakia has sent its anti-missile units. We're sending stuff. In a way, NATO is at war with Russia, but by proxy. Not by declaring it's a NATO thing, but by letting countries do their thing. I would be shocked if those planes from Poland didn't find their way into Ukraine. You could take the wings off and stick them in a truck. I think that people are beginning to recognise that this is not a 1939 moment, it's a 1936 moment. Putin needs to be stopped. And I think the EU should be more serious about European member states and aspiring states like Serbia and Hungary and others who are not complying with EU policy on Ukraine, and they should sanction these countries. Putin must get to see that there are no allies in Europe.
Well, he does have allies in Europe. He has allies all over the world. I mean, if Marine Le Pen wins the French election, he's going to have an ally in France.
Well, I think that remains to be seen. What we do know is that apart from Belarus, it's Serbia and it's Hungary who are supporting, or rather not complying with EU policy. And I think that the EU need to clamp down. There's a very interesting statement made by Tonino Picula, a Croatian MEP, who's very well respected and actually is a special rapporteur for the Balkans. But he actually said that member states and aspiring member states, that is to say states that are in the process of accession talks, will have problems if they don't comply with EU policy vis-à-vis Ukraine. So I think things are moving in the right direction, a little bit slowly, because it can't be an open declaration of war against Russia, and we all know the optics of that. But I think it's unimaginable that with all these ex-military, how many, 30,000, 20,000, going in to fight with the international brigade, as it were, in Ukraine, it's pretty unimaginable. It's not going to be some SAS or some Navy SEALs or some deniable military personnel in amongst them.
Well, yes, but we've our government and others in the West have flat out refused to even contemplate such a move. But perhaps because if they get caught, then that's going to look, the consequences of that will be very bad indeed.
Yeah, but deniable people are deniable people. How do you think we did things in Iraq or Afghanistan? Be real, Nick. I think that we are facing potentially a catastrophic situation. Ukraine has to beat Putin. There is no off-ramp for Putin. And if there was an off-ramp, how long would it be before he started again? 5 years? 6 years? How long would it be before Vučić, president of Serbia, feels so empowered that he starts attacking Bosnia and Herzegovina again? This is where it ends.
Well, we'll see. It doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. Thanks for that, Jason. Very interesting. 0345 6060 973. Peter tweets, lots of activity and an absence of achievement. Yes, we've supplied plenty of armaments, but the UK is one of the world's biggest arms dealers. We failed on refugees, diplomacy and sanctions that were delayed to let the oligarchs get their cash out of the UK. Yes, that's an interesting point, isn't it? We sell arms to the rest of the world. It's one of the biggest exports we have. I think when you look at our exports, it's I think they euphemistically call it machinery. But it's absolutely massive, the amount that we sell to the rest of the world. And yet we have so precious little of it ourselves to be able to donate to the Ukrainians, such that what he's offered, he went all the way there with the various, the dangers of doing that. Hang on a minute. With the dangers of doing that. And what he came up with was 120 armoured vehicles. Now, I was talking to my guest about that earlier on. He is full of praise for them, but an armoured vehicle is not something that shoots weapons. It's just basically a glorified lorry. We've offered £100 million worth of weaponry. Now, that sounds like a lot, but I think in defence circles, it's an amount that's also known as not that much. I will certainly take more of your calls about Boris Johnson's trip to Kyiv and what he offered there and what he might have offered instead. But first, let's talk about rising household bills, might affect your ability to buy a house. Apparently, banks are now tightening mortgage affordability tests, with Santander the first to make it tougher for borrowers to meet its lending criteria. It's not just one major bank, though. HSBC, Barclays, Lloyds and NatWest are all considering similar moves, apparently. Customers have been told it would reflect the rises in national insurance and taxes. But how many people will soon simply not be able to afford somewhere to call home? To talk about that, joining us now, Jane King. Jane is mortgage advisor at Ashridge Private Finance. Hello, Jane.
Hello, Nick. Good evening.
Well, thanks for being here. The how I've just outlined it, is that an exaggeration, or is that what people are going to be looking at shortly?
Well, no, it's not an exaggeration. We got some messages through advisors on Friday to say that Santander were going to be making these changes to their affordability calculator. So what happens is when they calculate how much they're prepared to lend you, they will take a figure for the cost of your expenses, so tax, NI, utilities, etc., etc. And they use statistics from the Office of National Statistics, the ONS, so that's where they get their figures from. So obviously the ONS are now increasing these figures. The lenders are picking these up. But obviously, if you're going to buy a house, then you don't actually know what your utilities are going to cost, etc. So whether you buy a well-insulated new build or a very drafty doer-upper, I'm afraid you're going to get clobbered with the same expenses as far as lenders are concerned.
Yes, I wonder if people are actually aware of that a bank doesn't look at their personal expenses. It looks at what the Office for National Statistics says is the average expense for somebody in their position. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So they won't ask us. So when we do a mortgage application, they don't say to you, how much do you think you're going to spend on your gas, electric, etc. They will make an estimate based on those figures. So as I say, whether they're good or bad, you're all going to get treated the same.
And just as far as how much the market has tightened just lately, are they refusing a lot of people that a couple of months ago they might have said yes to?
A lot of it is based on disposable income. Back in the day when it used to be a straightforward 4 times salary or 3 times salary, now it's based on more on disposable income. So higher earners are obviously not going to get hit so much as those people who are maybe lower earners or those who are on average salary. In fact, I went back and did a repeat affordability assessment of some clients that I looked at back in October, and the lenders definitely reduced it. I mean, they reduced it this time based on the same income and expenditure. They reduced the loan by around about 3%. So there's definitely signs of affordability being tightened.
Right, so just to give people some sort of rough guide, I mean, I know you just said that they don't quite go on multiples of earnings, but, you know, taking all that into account, I can remember banks were offering 5 or even 6 times your earning, and they didn't even really check whether what you were telling them was true. It was self-declared. They were just throwing money around like a drunken sailor. But these days, what can people expect to be able to afford given an average income of, let's say, a couple on 50,000, let's say?
I mean, no lender is going to lend. Some lenders are still lending 5 times salary if you're earning, say, more than 75,000 or something like that. If you're not, if you're earning 50, then they're going to be looking at maybe 4.5 to 4.8 times salary. So a couple on 50,000. Assuming they've got no commitment, so, you know, no debt, no credit cards, no loans, they're going to be able to borrow about 240,000.
Right. Now, that used to be an amount that you could play with, but these days, of course, I mean, the price of property just keeps going up and up and up. It seems to be immune to gravity. Do you think that this actually might be a good thing? And that it might sort of damp down these stratospheric rises, which don't appear to have any sort of connection to reality. I mean, the economy has taken a nosedive, and house prices continue to go up. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, we've got supply and demand. There's not a lot on the market in a lot of areas, which is pushing the prices up. But the biggest driver of house prices is coming in at the bottom with first-time buyers who are just being given more and more money by parents. Large quantities of lifetime mortgages now are being raised by older people solely for the purpose of gifting money to their children. So it's a case of the parents are gifting the money to the children so that the children can spend the money on the houses at the prices the parents want. It's almost a vicious circle. But that's what's driving it, is that a lot of buyers are getting additional help from parents.
Right, so as long as you are one of those lucky people with well-off parents, then the market itself seems to be on quite firm footings.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from the first-time buyers or even sometimes second steppers that I see, I would say at least 80% are getting help from parents or close family. Those that aren't, obviously we've still got the Help to Buy scheme, which is going to be around until next year. We've got the First Home scheme that's coming out later this year. Well, actually, that's already started in some places. And we've still got shared ownership. So there are some affordable options out there for those that, aren't lucky enough to have wealthy parents or parents with a lot of equity in their houses.
Can you remember back, were you in the business in 2009?
I was, with the credit crunch.
Yeah. Now, what happened, remind us, can you recall what happened to house prices when the last time that mortgage lenders really, closed their purses?
Yeah, I mean, that was slightly different in that there was just no money to lend. So it didn't matter, what you were earning, there was just no lenders out there that had any money to lend. So it was slightly different then, but house prices did stabilise, but a lot of people took their property off the market. And instead of selling, they decided to refurbish, extend, etc., and people just didn't move.
Do you think that now people might be best advised just to hang on a bit because house prices might come down?
I think they will. I think we will see a situation. There has to be a situation where these properties are just not affordable anymore. And I think in that situation, I think what will happen is if they start to come down for the first-time buyers, then those moving up the ladder will start to pay less, and it will become a self-levelling sort of transactions. They'll all sort of come down. But I think there is going to be a point where everyone's just going to throw their hands in the air and say, we just cannot afford to buy the properties at this price.
Now, you are a mortgage advisor. If I were coming to you asking for tips to get my finances in order, to present the best face to a lender, what would you tell me to do?
I think the biggest thing that you can do at the moment is not have any debt. If you're thinking about that lovely car, the new car lease, don't bother, buy yourself a cheap second-hand runaround. Stay away from buy now, pay later, so things like Klarna. They're not doing people's credit files any good in a lot of places. And so just get rid of debt. Debt is the biggest issue that drives down affordability for mortgages, so just don't take any on.
I was speaking some while ago to somebody who does what you do, and what they flagged up was a gambling habit. Even if it's a small amount, does that start warning bells clanging in banks' offices?
Some lenders don't like to see consistent online gambling. If they see maybe a couple of months of regular online gambling, then what they may do is look at it as a monthly commitment. So the odd lottery ticket, here and there, and a flutter on the Grand Nationals is fine. But if they saw a regular, say, £100 a month coming out of somebody's bank account, I have had instances of lenders that will say, right, well, as far as we're concerned, that's a £100 commitment, which is equal to, £1,200 a year, and they will deduct it from affordability. So it's best, if you want a flutter, draw the cash out the bank and just have a flutter with some cash.
Right. Cash, yeah. I remember cash.
You remember cash? Yeah, do that. Take it out of the cash machine and have your little flutter on cash.
Good to talk to you, Jane. Thanks very much for your time.
Pleasure.
That's Jane King, mortgage advisor at Ash Ridge Private Finance. We are talking about Boris Johnson visiting Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. He secretly took a train there. He's apparently been eager to go for weeks. His popularity in this country is about that of a garden slug, so pretending to be tough on the world stage might be his best bet right now. Plus, it was a good time to run away from the Rishi Sunak implosion, which we'll talk about later. A video has emerged showing Johnson on the train from Poland to Ukraine. It shed light on how the high-risk visit was conducted. And I wonder if it actually was a high-risk visit. I mean, would you be surprised if a call went through to the Russian leader to advise him on Boris Johnson's presence, just in case? That sort of thing happens all the time, and the phone lines remain open just in case an accident leads to all-out war. I mean, does Boris Johnson strike you as the brave type? And on what he offered, he vowed to send Ukraine 120 armoured vehicles. What they are actually calling for are tanks, heavy weaponry. And we have been perhaps unable, or certainly unwilling, but unable perhaps to send them because, amazingly, we don't have any. We don't have any to spare. The government cuts over the last 12 years to the military budget mean we've got 40, not 40,000, 40. That is according to the Telegraph's defence editor, Con Coughlin. So no wonder we are apparently restrained in what we can send them, because we don't have anything to send. 0345 6060 973. Enfield. Hello, Mike.
Hi there. Mr. Johnson is quite happy to leave England when it gets too hot, and that's the reason I think he's got over there, because he has every time there's a problem, he disappears abroad. The other thing about this woman you were talking to and prices of houses, if you get 200,000 houses wanted every year from the indigenous population, the British, and you've got people coming over from Hong Kong and from Europe, of course house prices will continue to rise. There's nothing you can stop unless you build 500,000 houses in a year. It'll continue to rise. So she's talking out of the back of her head.
Well, I don't think that's fair at all, but we have, over the last 30-some years, well, since the war, actually, since the Second World War, built, in some years, 0 new houses, whereas Germany seems to be able to build 250,000 a year, over and over and over again, year after year after year. And that's probably why there doesn't, to my knowledge, appear to be a housing crisis in Germany, whereas there is in this country, because we just haven't built enough houses, obviously. Thanks, Mike. Bedford. Hello, Linda.
Hi, Nick. I'm afraid I tuned in a little bit late this evening, and I just came in to hear your guy talking about the fact that it's great that we've got a nuclear deterrent.
Yeah.
And my immediate thought was, he must be the Navy. And, of course, he was the Navy. My background is I used to be in military intelligence during the Cold War, so quite interesting. A lot of my intelligence type friends would be very against the nuclear deterrent. My argument would be, actually, that makes us a target. And it is quite disturbing. And I have to say, I have a memory of when you were doing, like, virtually every night of the week, a few weeks ago when the war first started.
Yeah.
And you must remember that Thursday night, I think it was, when it looked like the Russians were attacking that nuclear plant.
I'll never forget it.
I will never forget, and I'll never forget your reaction, because it kind of mirrored how I felt. And I thought, I have not felt like this since I was a child. And I'm a bit older than you, but, you know, as children, we grew up with that fear of war and that fear of nuclear war. And so the idea that actually prevents them attacking us, I just think, especially the way we behave as a country, it makes us more of a target.
Nothing about it makes any sense to me. It's not a preventative measure. In the way that I outlined to my guest, I mean, my feeling is that mutually assured destruction, ironically, MAD, does not work if somebody is mad enough to set off one of those bombs in the first place. So it seems to be completely pointless, because if you're mad enough to send a nuclear weapon into another country, then you're also mad enough not to be bothered about the consequences of one coming back.
And this is what people just don't get. But on the Boris issue, or before I talk about Boris, I just want to say as well, is his name Vance from Regent's Park or wherever he is, your guy that calls you every so often, telling you you're keeping him sane. And I want to say thank you for that as well, because I do think sometimes you think, oh my God, is it just me that feels like this? And so it's very reassuring. Thank you.
Well, thanks.
But yeah, on Boris, oh my goodness, where to start? what worries me about him is he's got this whole idea about Churchillian stuff, and he goes off. And you look at it, you look at American presidents, as soon as there's a problem at home, just go running off somewhere else and be seen as a great statesman and whatever.
He does have a history of escaping abroad.
Escaping abroad.
When it gets hot here.
Yeah, exactly. And he goes to Kyiv when actually the Russians have withdrawn and they're going somewhere else, which is also quite interesting. But what I feel is just so disingenuous is at the same time as he's saying, we'll give you this little piddling amount of arms, which are completely irrelevant to what you want. We're also the country where we're relying on countries like Poland to look after fleeing Ukrainians.
That's right.
Because we are insisting on visas. And I just find that completely disingenuous.
I thought it was interesting how many stories came out yesterday from right-wing press as though they had been briefed to take the heat off the government about this very issue, and it was story after story after story blaming everybody except the government for the lack of Ukrainian refugees that have been allowed here. It was the local council's fault, and it was the people's fault who had unsafe houses. They didn't have a banister on their stairs, and it was the amount of fault that was laid at everybody except who it actually should be, who should be on the sharp end. It was remarkable.
Exactly, and they've tied themselves up in knots because of the Home Office policy towards, they think, we all hate foreigners, we all hate immigrants, we all hate
it's the Conservative Party's unique selling point. That's
exactly, and they're in a bind. And so now we've tied ourselves up in knots, and I just, listening to LBC over the last week, the number of families where they're waiting for somebody to come and they can't get here. It's completely unacceptable. And this whole idea, this lie that they've been telling, whether it's about COVID or whether it's about Ukraine, which is, we are leading the world, we are leading Europe, we are doing this, we're doing that. And I think they've, as you've often said as well, it's the Trump playbook. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that still will buy that.
Yep, that's true. Linda, thanks for that. 0345 6060 973. What we've offered, Boris Johnson on our behalf has offered Ukraine lately is £100 million worth of weaponry. Now, that sounds like a lot, but isn't really that much, given that one anti-tank missile system costs $250,000. So you're going to chew through £100 million in the defence shop pretty quick. I wonder if Boris Johnson actually deserves much of the praise that the Ukrainian president was showering on him. Perhaps he was just pleased to see someone. After their meeting, Zelensky wrote, "The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, is one of the most principled opponents of the Russian invasion, a leader in sanctions pressure on Russia and defence support of Ukraine." I mean, it does sound like he's taking the mickey, doesn't it? 0345 6060 973. I mean, everything that we know, he and the Conservatives in general accepted millions of pounds from Russian donors of dubious character that he's refused to pay back. He was very late to sanction oligarchs, giving them plenty of time to take their ill-gotten gains out of the country and probably bury them in a British overseas territory where we can't see it anymore. He's failed Ukrainian refugees. We've got the meanest response of anywhere in Europe. He ignored advice from the intelligence services to ennoble his close personal friend Evgeny Lebedev, who is now Lord Lebedev of Siberia. He made himself a security risk by abandoning his protection, messaging people on untraceable mobile phone apps and welcoming into the corridors of power anybody with an open checkbook. Doesn't sound like something that should someone that should be showered with praise. Edinburgh, Al.
Hi. I'm sure Zelensky appreciated Johnson's visit, but I think Johnson just does things for himself, really. But I'm going to be slightly controversial. I think NATO should be involved right now, and they should force Putin completely out of Ukraine.
Don't you think that NATO is actually involved right now? I mean, NATO countries are sending an enormous amount of military hardware and knowledge. Vladimir Putin must think that he's at war with NATO as it is.
Yeah, I think a lot is being supplied. Tobias Ellwood's pretty good, actually, I think. I think he captured it by saying that we're probably giving enough to Ukraine to defend itself, but not enough to win.
Right.
But I think the thing is I think he needs to be really kicked out, partly because I think he's probably looking now to make progress along the coast. And the people I'd be worried about are actually Moldova.
Well, he's already threatened Finland and Sweden, who are now contemplating joining NATO, whereas previously, of course, they were neutral. He's sent planes into their airspace, and by many accounts, he's launched an attack on their infrastructure. A computer attack.
Yeah, but I think going south towards Moldova will be something that's relatively easy for him, and that will be a big claim, an achievement to take to his parade in May. But I think we also have this moral obligation, really, plus the Budapest Memorandum. So I think really we should be fighting with them, because otherwise it's just going to prolong, and we can view all of this, destruction and cruelty going on, and we could stop that. And I think we have an obligation, really, to do that.
Yeah,
I think it's almost culpable to actually let it carry on.
It does seem as though in the future we will be embarrassed by our inactivity, while children are blown up underneath a theatre and people are blown to bits while queuing for a train and so on. Yeah, I don't think the future is going to be very kind to us. Assuming that there is a future.